Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 702, and today's date is June 26, 2015, and the title of this episode is All Indicators Point to an Event Occurring in the Next 100 Days. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand the situation in Greece. It really hasn't changed that much. I mean, we have the Greek government, the central bankers, they're sitting there, they're talking about the agreement which they can't agree upon, and none of them want to give an inch. And if Greece does refuse, the ministers will move, and I'm talking about the central banks, will move to discuss Plan B, where they'll prepare to limit the damage from a Greek default to Greek banks and other Eurozone countries. Merkel and Hollande, they kind of refuse to talk about this in public. And what we're seeing now in Greece is that their deposits in their banks, they have reached an 11-year low. People have taken so much money out because they're nervous, they're afraid, they're worried about being Cyprused. And what we're seeing is that the official data from the Bank of Greece today showed deposits fell by 3.8 billion euros to 129.9 billion euros at the end of last month, marking a 21% plunge since November of 2014. I mean, that is a lot of money that was taken out of the system. And when we look at this situation, we need to apply this to Europe, to Australia, to Canada, and the United States, because we all understand that we are headed towards a collapse situation. And we all understand that eventually what's going to happen is they're going to go after the money in the banks. They've already set up the documentation that supports them, in which they can say, okay, we have the documentation, we can go into the banks, we can take the money, we'll just replace your money with our worthless bank stock. This is what happened in Cyprus. And this is what the Greek people are so afraid of. And if they're afraid, everyone should be scared. Everyone should be saying, you know something? Maybe it's time I keep some cash on hand. I mean, of course, don't tell anyone where it is. Maybe I should invest in some gold and silver just to keep on hand. I mean, most of the people at this time should only be keeping the money they need to pay bills. I mean, this is my personal opinion. This is what I do. I don't like to keep much more than that in the bank. Not like I have a lot. But I only keep what I need in there to pay the bills. But here in the United States, most of the people don't realize this. They keep everything in the bank. Yes, they have investments in stocks and real estate, but most of their life savings is in the bank. And of course, the United States government central bankers, they're keeping this illusion alive where there's nothing wrong. Keep it in the bank. It will be safe. It's insured by the FDIC. Don't worry. Nothing will ever happen to it. It's safe in there. But of course, most of the people don't realize that the people who are going to rob you work in the bank. They are the banks. And we can see as time goes on that we are definitely getting closer to that point where people are going to have to start making decisions. Those people who haven't taken the money out of the bank are going to have to say, you know something? Maybe I should start taking out a little bit here. I mean, what's the difference if it's in the bank or you have it on hand? Because are you really getting any interest in the bank whatsoever? No, you are not. Here in the United States, they're trying to convince us that everything is fine. We see the UMich consumer sentiment spiked from 90.7 to 96.1, well above the 94.6 preliminary print, just shy of the 2015 highs, which are also the highest since 2004. And what's very interesting about this is the percentage of population employed is continually dropping, but consumer sentiment is surging, is increasing. While we see gas prices going up, food going up, more people being laid off, retail shops closing up, people being laid off from retail, and people, for some reason, they feel confident. They feel like things are going to get better. They have hope. But again, we've talked about this before. Hope is good, but reality, the facts, show that it's not going to get better, because when you look at all the economic indicators and everything that we've been looking at, we see that we are only headed in one direction, and that's towards a collapse. I mean, back in 2005, 2006, 2007, people had a huge amount of hope. People thought, oh, my house is going to continually go up in price because the corporate media, the National Association of Realtors told me so. The federal government told me so. Oh, thank God there's no recession being forecasted. So I hope that I'll get a better raise next year. I hope that my house will go up even further. I hope that I keep my job. But that was all wiped out in a split second for many, many people. Not everybody. And we see, as we're coming up to this next crisis, this will affect everyone, because the U.S. government central bankers didn't make the economy better. What they did is they took it, manipulated it, and created a central bank economy where they blew up bubbles all over the place. The people are not even supporting it anymore. And when the whole thing comes crumbling down, there's nothing left to support it. Yeah, they can try blowing up the bubbles once again, but again, how's that going to work? They've already done it. There's nothing to pick up the slack, and this is why they're going to turn toward an event and eventually war. I mean, if we look around the economy today, we see that there are a lot of stores during the boom. There were a lot of people shopping. A lot of people had jobs and extra money to spend. Today we see the opposite. Malls collapsing. Strip malls emptying. All the stores that were opened up are closing. They're contracting. There's not enough shoppers today because people don't have the disposable income. That's it. It's very, very simple. And if we make it through this holiday season, if we don't have war or anything else like that, is going to be horrific. I mean, look at last year. Do you think this year's going to get any better? Even though they're telling us the unemployment numbers are continually coming down. And if you use common sense, if we go back to 2010, 2011, 2012, when the unemployment was much, much higher, almost double, sales were better during Christmas than they were when the unemployment hit, 5.8% in December during the holiday season? How can that be? It doesn't make sense. If more people are working and have jobs, they would go out and spend for the holiday season because they're secure in their jobs. Or is this number manipulated, and did most of the people go from a full-time to a part-time, and many people couldn't find that job, so they've fallen off, as the government puts it, even though they still want a job, they're just not counted, and this is how they came up with the number. That makes more sense. And as the unemployment continually drops, we're going to see sales continually fall, because the manipulated statistical numbers do not match what's really going on. Now, coming out of the Economic Collapse blog, he issued a red alert. And he's saying that this red alert is going to be for the last 6 months of 2015. And I can see why he is saying this. He's looking at the economic data, which we have been looking at, and he's looking at the stock market, he's looking at the derivatives, the velocity of money. And if you factor in the geopolitical aspects of all of this, we see that, yes, this is a perfect setup. Something is definitely going to occur. And he went on to say, just because stocks have recently been hitting all-time record highs does not mean the overall economy has been doing well. When an economy is healthy, money tends to circulate fairly rapidly. I buy something from you, then you take the money and you buy something from someone else. In a stable and growing economy, people generally feel good about things and they are not afraid to spend. But we're not seeing that today. But during hard times, the exact opposite happens. That is why the velocity of money almost always slows down during a recession. The velocity of money has indeed gone down during every recession since 1960. Once a recession is over, the velocity of money is supposed to go back up. But what are we seeing? The velocity of money is continually falling. It has not gone back up. This tells us that the statistical numbers like the unemployment and people getting jobs is completely fake, phony, and false because they're not out there spending. They don't have the disposable income. So we're not out of this recession. I think we've been in this depression for quite a while. We are collapsing, and the government, the central banks have just been covering it up to convince you that everything is fine. And only 2 times before has the SP 500 been up by more than 200% over a 6-year time frame. The first was in 1929, and of course we know what happened then. The stock market came crumbling down. The second was in 2000, right before the dot-com bubble. And we're noticing that the smart money is pulling their money out of stocks while they still can. And this is an indicator to let you know, oh, we've reached the height of the market. Maybe it'll go up a little bit more, but it doesn't matter to them. They want to get out. They want to sell it to the retail stock investor. Mutual fund investors have pulled more money out of the stocks than they have put into stocks for 16 weeks in a row. And other people are sounding the alarm. Ron Paul, prepare for a bear market in bonds. Carl Icahn, financial markets are extremely overheated. Martin Armstrong, his economic confidence model predicts that a big bang is coming in 2015.75, which is the end part of this year. Jim Rogers, we will see some kind of major problem in the world financial markets. And we have to remember, July 15th to September 15th is Jade Helm. July 28th, we understand the banks in Europe have to come in line with the bail-in agreement. We understand that September 15th, the 70th session of the UN General Assembly begins on this date. It is being reported that France plans to introduce a resolution which would give formal UN Security Council recognition to a Palestinian state. Up until now, the United States continually blocked this. September 25th to September 27th, the United Nations is going to launch a brand new sustainable development agenda for the entire planet called Agenda 21 on steroids. And when we look at the geopolitical aspects, we see that in Ukraine, they are preparing, training, bringing in lethal weapons, getting ready for a major offensive. NATO is out there saying that increased fighting could come this summer. We see in Syria, the Islamic State, which is the proxy army for the United States government, has taken over the east side. We see that Israel is making the case that the Islamic State is firing firecrackers into their country, hitting the desert, and is coming from the Gaza Strip. And they're going to use this to come up through the south because we already see the Free Syrian Army already maneuvering from the south to the north, where Damascus is. We have the Islamic State, which is the proxy army, coming from the east to the west. And we have the newly trained Free Syrian Army up in Turkey coming in from the north, heading towards the south. And we know, with all the propaganda out about Assad being a terrorist, about the doctor testifying in front of Congress, with all the Islamic State terror that's going on around the world today, propaganda always comes before the event to convince people that, it was definitely the Islamic State. It was definitely Russia. It was definitely China who did something. And we see all of this now fitting in. So in the next 100 days, because as we know, and this has happened 2 years in a row, as Congress leaves, what happened in 2013, all of a sudden, Obama came out and said, Assad used sarin gas. Almost ready to go in there. All the ships were prepared to go in and get Assad. Well, Putin stepped in and kind of stopped the entire thing. Then in 2014, Assad won the elections again in June, the end of June. And then all of a sudden, at the end of July, going into August, what happened? The Islamic State, the army that the United States government, Israel, UK, and other countries that were training in Jordan, in Turkey, all of a sudden came into Iraq and maneuvered into Syria by the thousands, as they say. This was all planned because their goal is to get Assad. Now here we are in 2015. Oh, and during that time, the United States decided they were allowed to bomb the infrastructure of Syria. And they were allowed to bomb in Iraq without any authorization whatsoever. And now they have the authorization for war pending in Congress, not going anywhere. And that will allow them to invade Syria, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, and Yemen, and any other country that has the Islamic State. So we're seeing now, as we approach 2015, the same thing's happening. We're seeing all the propaganda. We're coming up to the summer months. August, Congress completely leaves Washington. Obama and his administration is there alone. And we can see that they are definitely preparing for another event. What is this event going to be? We don't know. But we know it's going to be used to convince everyone that we need to go into Syria, Iraq, or it could be used to say, China or Russia has cyber attacked the United States, and this is why the economy is failing. I'm going to go with the first one because this is their main goal, is to start the offensive, and we might see an event in Ukraine to get that kicked off, and we might also see something happen in Syria or here in the United States that it was the Islamic State to get that authorization for war passed. And we can see that, again, this is all leading up to that time frame. All indicators point to that, and we're going to have to watch this very, very closely. And this is why I've been telling everyone to be prepared, to get ready for something to happen. Just because the other two times we were heading down that path and it was cut off, doesn't mean they're going to not try again. They're going to keep going until they get something that works. And when it does work, you want to be prepared with food, with supplies, with medication, and all these things. You need them to protect yourself. You need a weapon. You need cash on hand because we're heading into a dangerous period. They're running out of time. We see that Germany, at the same time all this is happening and all these sanctions on Russia, it's really hurting Germany and the European nations. I mean, Germany right now may lose up to 9 billion euros, that's $10 billion in export revenue over sanctions against Russia. In the first 4 months of 2015, German exports to Russia have seriously decreased, and we see a decrease at 34% in comparison with the same period of last year. So we can see at this point, as all of these countries completely fall apart, as the deal is not made with Greece, and even if there is one, they're only going to last for a couple more months on that deal, then they're at the same point once again. This entire system is falling apart. It cannot be maintained. And they know this. And this is why they're pushing very hard. This is why we hear all these little warnings coming out. This is why everything is all coming together. All the points, all the lines are being drawn to create this picture of what is coming. And that is definitely an event that will occur most likely in the next 100 days. Now, I'm not saying this is the collapse. I'm saying this is the first part of it. An event to get us to war. Event to get some type of bill passed. An event to get the Ukraine war started. To kick it all off. And then we enter the fall. Now, yesterday I reported, and it was all over the corporate media, that Obamacare has won the decision in the Supreme Court that the people can keep their subsidies and he can continue with Obamacare and nobody has to return any of that money. And we have to go back, and we reported on this a while back, where the NSA spies on all the people, spies on everybody, even government employees and Supreme Court judges. Because what they do is they take that information, they hold it, and when they need it, they use it to blackmail certain people. And I reported that, Chief Justice Roberts, he was against Obamacare, saying it was unconstitutional. And he kept on that track until one day he said, okay, it's constitutional now. He rewrote it a little bit, submitted it, and then left for 2 weeks. And this whole thing came out that, yes, he was coerced in some way, somehow, and convinced that he should go ahead and approve Obamacare. And now we see the ruling with the subsidies. But what's very interesting about all of this is that this was a straightforward court case. And the issue was the interpretation of a phrase that stated the healthcare exchanges must be established by the state in order to receive tax credits. Scalia said that he was baffled that the majority of the justices could interpret this to mean that the federal government could give tax credits in states where exchanges weren't established by the state. Words no longer have meaning if an exchange that is not established by a state is established by the state. It is hard to come up with a clearer way to limit tax credits to state exchanges than to use the words established by the state, Scalia said. That sounds pretty basic, right? Established by the state should mean established by the state. He says that this ridiculous decision will be remembered through the years, and that it sends a message that the Supreme Court of the United States favors some laws over others and is prepared to do whatever it takes to uphold and assist its favorites. Near the end of his dissent, he chided his fellow justices for rewriting Obamacare in order to save it, and he suggested that this law should be referred to as SCOTUS care. And we can see, and I'm going to take this a step further, that some of these Supreme Court justices must have been blackmailed, just like Chief Justice Roberts, where he just went completely 180 degrees and said, yes, it is constitutional. Obamacare is good to go. You can tax the people. And the same thing seems to happen once again. And it seems that the Obama administration uses the NSA information to benefit his agenda. Just like everything else that we are seeing. He has a pen, he has a paper, and we see him write executive orders, memorandums. We see him have the Senate vote and they turn down the fast track, and all of a sudden the next vote, it's like a miracle. They said, okay, the fast track is good. Went into the House, he got the fast track, which means he doesn't really have to work with Congress. He can make the decisions on his own. Congress is saying, we give you the power. And the power now is with him, the corporations, and the central banks. The Congress, they just gave up everything. And they don't even care. So we can see that they use the spying, they use blackmail to push their agendas. Well, one agenda didn't make it, and that is gun control, because they used the false flag event in Connecticut, they used the false flag event in Charleston, and many other areas, and they just cannot get the gun control push. They can't get the laws voted on, passed, and it continually falls flat. And again, they cannot write any law that infringes on the Second Amendment, which means limit. So all these 2,000 laws they have that are limiting the Second Amendment, they're all null and void. And they continually do this because they're hoping that the American people will believe that these laws are in force, but they are not. And what's very interesting, and we discussed this about the Confederate flag controversy where they're trying to get rid of it, and we have to go back to Charlie Hebdo, when all the leaders were out there arm in arm, and of course that was a complete photo op. There was no crowd behind them. We reported on that. They were all out there, free speech. People should have the right to say anything. You can put any picture on a magazine, blah, 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 blah. And most of the leaders were from countries that limit the media, limit journalism, take away the rights from the people, creating laws where they tell you which sites you can look at and which sites you can't. But here in the United States, we have the First Amendment, freedom of speech and expression. And they're trying to convince you that this object, the Confederate flag, should be taken away. Well, no. If I want that flag, I have every right to hold it. I have every right to put it out there because it's my right for free speech and expression. You see, when the government tells you what you can or cannot do, it is controlled or permitted speech or expression. And this is what they're trying to do. So people have brought up, Thomas Jefferson. This was all over the corporate media that we should remove him because he owned slaves. Well, during that time period, a lot of people owned slaves. Actually, slavery has gone back thousands upon thousands of years. Is it a good thing? No, I don't think any man, woman, child should ever be a slave. They should have the right to exist and have every single right that every other person has. Doesn't matter what color, what religion, it makes no difference. You're a human being living on this earth. But when we look at some of the people that talked about free speech, like George Orwell, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. George Washington, if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. Benjamin Franklin. Abraham Lincoln said, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. And this is what we are seeing today. We are seeing it from the inside, from our own government, that are being controlled by central bankers, by corporations, by foreign governments, paying them off, convincing the rest of the people you don't need to have free speech. You don't have to have freedom of expression. We will tell you what you can or cannot have. We will control what sites you can go to. We will control the game you can play. If it says Civil War, no, you're not allowed to play it. Well, that's not freedom. That's control. They've taken the choice away from you. You have the freedom to make these choices. You don't need the government. I can look at anything I want. If I decide I don't like it, I turn it off. If enough people turn it off, or enough people don't purchase it, guess what? Corporations will not produce it. It's as simple as that. This whole thing, they're trying to get rid of the history. They're trying to convince you that it's better for you this way. We get rid of what we say. We tell you that there was no civil war, that these states weren't trying to secede from the government, They don't want you thinking about any of this. They want it erased. They want all of the rights erased. They want the Constitution removed. And you can see they're doing this with every step, and they're not going to stop. Now, out in Armenia, we understand the U.S. is pushing another color revolution. And we can see at this point, coming from the U.S. government, they're already out there responding to what's happening in Armenia. They're saying we are concerned about reports of excessive police use or force to disperse the crowd on the morning of June 23rd, as well as several reports of abuse while in police custody. That's strange, because in Chicago they have that black site where they just take people in without any due process, and the government never said anything about that. Actually, in Ferguson and in Baltimore, they just let it happen. They didn't say anything really about that either. In addition, they said, we are troubled about reports that journalists and their equipment were specifically targeted during the operation. Well, didn't the same thing happen in Ferguson? I wonder if the same people that planned it in Ferguson are now planning it in Armenia, because it seems like they are. Think about it. When around 250,000 Britons rallied in London against punishing austerity days, U.S. officials didn't say a word. Nothing about that. Nor is Israel criticized for daily persecution of Palestinians, mass political imprisonments, torture, wars of aggression, and other high crimes. When the Ukraine forces are shelling and bombing the civilians in the Donbass area, nothing's said. When the United States is in Syria bombing the people there, they don't care. All right, we killed a couple thousand. What's the big deal? But when they're having a color revolution, they come out and they speak out about it. This is how you know right there and then it is a color revolution. They're trying to overthrow the government there. Now, out in Ukraine, we see Poroshenko is out there saying that they have increased their number of troops in the zone of special anti-terrorism operation to 60,000 servicemen. He said that these new soldiers have been made stronger by the training by the Western countries like the United States. They have repaired their military equipment. They have new military equipment that was brought in. And they have improved the logistics and financial support of the Ukrainian soldiers. So they are ready to fight and they're ready to go. That's pretty much what he's saying. We see on the corporate media, it's all out there, that Putin called Obama, or Obama called Putin. We don't know exactly what happened here. And Putin was explaining to Obama that Russia is not involved in Ukraine whatsoever. There are no Russian troops, and you're getting false information. Well, the United States government, central bankers, they know this. I think what Obama was saying to Putin was, listen, don't get in our way. We're going to have a major offensive coming this summer. In August, we're going to hit Syria. We're going to remove Assad. You'll be out of Syria, or you can take a piece of it if you like, because we're going to build that pipeline. You can keep your ships there too. And we're going into the southeastern region and then Crimea. If you decide to act, this is going to start World War III. So you decide. Now, of course, it didn't go down that way, but we see already with Kerry, who had a conversation with Lavrov, and now we have Putin and Obama having a conversation. And I believe they're building up to something very big. And this is why Saudi Arabia was out there talking to Putin, kind of bribing him, step aside. They've done this before, because we're going into Syria very, very soon. Now, we see and we know out in the Middle East the situation has not changed. We understand that the people in each one of these countries are rising up, trying to kick out the puppet masters. And we can see at this point in time that the United States government, UK, Israel, they are preparing and getting ready to go into Syria. And what's very interesting, and this is coming out of the journal neo.org, they've gotten hold of the Brookings Institution report from a think tank called Deconstructing Syria Towards a Regionalized Strategy for a Confederal Country. So what they're saying here is that the U.S. is going to pour billions into the moderates, which is really the Islamic State. And the document openly admits that the U.S. has provided billions in arming and training militants fed into the devastating and increasingly regional conflict. It admits that the U.S. maintains and should expand operations in Jordan and NATO member Turkey to provide even more weapons cache fighters to this area. And the U.S. will invade Syria. After arming and funding a literal region-wide army terrorist, the United States now plans to use the resulting chaos to justify what it has sought since the beginning of the conflict, when it became clear the Syrian government was not going to collapse. The United States is going to establish buffer zones. Of course, they changed the name to safe zones. And we can see that forming right now. The Free Syrian Army in the eastern part of Syria wants that to be a safe zone. And what will they do with these zones once they're created? These zones will then house U.S. armed forces on the ground. They will occupy the Syrian territory. Now, we discussed this in a couple reports ago. We were looking at this situation, looking at the indicators and what was going on, and from everything that we've been seeing, this is what we thought was going to happen. And here is the think tank report that the U.S. is following, and they're doing exactly that. Now, of course, how are they going to put boots on the ground? They need the authorization for war passed to do this. The U.S. assumes that once this territory is seized and U.S. troops are stationed there, the Syrian army will not dare attack the United States in fear of a response. So they're going to capture that area and continually push towards Damascus, an incremental invasion. So the U.S. is preparing, getting ready to invade Syria. They're following the document, and they will not let up. Now, we saw today terrorism in France, in Tunisia, and in Kuwait. We see that 3 fatal terrorist attacks on the 3 continents within hours of each other. On Friday morning, at least one individual drove a car into a gas processing plant outside the city of France, in Lyon. And they, I guess, beheaded 1 person, injured 2 others. Then we saw a gunman then burst into a Spanish-owned beachside tourist resort in Tunisia, killed about 37 people. And in Kuwait, a suicide bomber set off explosion in a Shiite mosque packed with about 2,000 people. 16 people were dead. Now, of course, the Islamic State is out there saying, yes, this was us. No one else really came forward. This is to push the fear factor. This is to push that it's very dangerous in this region. The Islamic State is expanding. It's time to pass the authorization for war. And we can see at this point in time, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center issued a joint intelligence bulletin saying this July 4th, there could be some terrorist activity. Something could happen here, but we have no leads whatsoever or any other information. So what they want on this Independence Day, when we wanted to be independent of the British government, they want you in fear. They want you cowering. They want control. This is why they're doing it at this point in time. Do I think something's going to happen on this date? No, I don't. I think something's going to happen later that summer, but I don't think it's going to happen. Now, I could be wrong. But I think they're using this as a control mechanism to keep people scared, to see a lot more police on the street, a lot more armed divisions on the street. And we will see that to keep you scared, because that's what they want. Now, I just wanted to follow up on that Charleston, South Carolina shooting with Dylan Roof. And we discovered that, yes, this website, the domain was created in Russia. Now it looks like it's hosted in Russia. And it was created by an automated system. And it makes no sense because the whole thing just popped up one day. There were no snapshots previous to this when the domain was created in February of 2015. And now we find other information because the discovery, and this is coming out of the Daily Sheeple, the discovery of the website began with a political blogger who posted the following tweet: "Anyone have $49 to throw away?" Less than an hour later, Twitter user Emma Quengle, a self-described communist, responded to that tweet. Why did this person pony up $49 to buy the website domain report? And who is Emma Quengle? Well, Scott Creighton, owner of a website called American Everyman, he did some digging and uncovered some information on Quengle. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Dylan Storms Roof's unassigned confession website has been found by an Obama agenda supporter and a writer. How interesting. Quengle owns a site called Manifesto, and a manifest was found on this other site. Interesting once again. Now, when you compare the writings of Quengle on this Manifesto site, they kind of match the manifesto that was found on the last Rhodesian. And if you look at Dylan Roof, he had like a 9th grade education, and it doesn't really seem that he would be able to write something like this because it doesn't match his style. And when you look at that manifesto compared to Quengle's manifestos on the site, they kind of jive together. So we can see at this point in time, this entire false flag event was just that, a false flag event to push agendas, because it's starting, well, it has been falling apart. And as we dig deeper and deeper, we're finding out more and more information that makes no sense whatsoever. This is why when you see ban the Confederate flag, you can't look at these games, we need to remove the names of all the Confederate generals, let's take down the Thomas Jefferson Memorial and all the other memorials. This is an agenda. It's a plan to erase any notion of the Founding Fathers, states that wanted to remove themselves from the federal government, because they don't want people thinking about this whatsoever. They're chipping away at your rights. They're chipping away at the Constitution. They're chipping away at everything that we know. And it's our job as we the people. It's our job to say no. It's our job to say, no, you know something? We don't need the government to say what we can or cannot look at. We'll decide on our own. If we don't want to look at it, we will not go to the store and purchase it. If we don't want to play that game, we will not play that game. If we don't want to look at that website, we'll decide. You don't have to decide for us. You are not our parent. You do not control us. And it's time for all the people to get together and say, yeah, we're not listening anymore. We're not listening to you government employees. Actually, you're not for the people anymore. It's time for you to step down. We need to put people in there that will work with the people, be for the people, and help the people in this country. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.